today I can determine domain and range of a function by finding where the graph starts and stops from left to right and top to bottom. So domain is all of your possible x values. Range is all of your possible y values. So we just need to find where the y values, x values start and stop for the domain, and where the y values start and stop for the range. So what I'm going to do, I usually take my pen and I travel from left to right for domain and bottom to top for range, but I can't show you my pen traveling on the graph, so I just need this line and I'm going to travel. So domain is all of my possible x values. So I'm going to find where my x values start and stop from left to right. So I'm going to start on the left. Is there graph all the way out here at negative infinity, or is there arrow pointing out here? No. At what x value does my graph start? Well, it starts right here. That x value is 0. I have graph, I have graph, I have graph, 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 graph. I have graph. My graph ends at 24. Since 0 and 4 are included, I'm going to put brackets. That is my domain. Now, we're going to keep everything in interval notation for now. We're not going to worry about set builder notation because that's something to deal with another time. Now, for range, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to hold it horizontally. And I'm going to travel from bottom to top. So is there graph all the way down here at negative infinity or arrow pointing down here? No. At what y value does my graph start? Where does this line first hit the graph? Well, it hits right here. Right here it starts hitting. This y value is 30. I have graph, I have graph, I have graph, I have graph. It doesn't stop here. I still have graph on the left. I have graph, 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 graph until I get up here. That y value is 80. Since 30 and 80 are included, they get brackets. Domain is from 0 to 24. The range is from 30 to 80. That's what you got to do. Just gonna, for the domain, you're going to take your pen, you're going to travel from left to right, notating where the graph starts and stops. And for range, I'm going to travel horizontally. I'm going to hold my pen horizontally, travel from bottom to top, again, making a notation of where the graph starts and stops. Number 2, let's start with domain. Domain is all my possible x values. So I'm going to travel along my x-axis. And I'm going to determine where the graph starts and stops. Is there graph all the way out here at negative infinity, or is there graph pointing out here? Yes. Since I have an arrow here, that means this thing is going down and left forever. So my domain will start at negative infinity. I have graph, 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 graph. Do I have graph all the way out here at positive infinity? Yes. Since this thing has arrows, it's pointing up and right, it's going up and right forever. So my domain is negative infinity to positive infinity. Now, infinity can never be, you can never have something equal to infinity. So because of that, infinity always gets a parenthesis. To help remember that, infinity is curvy, and the parenthesis is curvy. The curvy always gets the curvy. Now, for my y values, I'm going to hold it horizontally. I'm going to go bottom to top. Do I have graph all the way down here? Yes. So my range starts at negative infinity. I have graph, 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 graph. up to positive infinity. Again, parentheses always, infinity always gets parentheses. So for this function, my domain and range are both negative infinity to positive infinity, since there's arrows pointing down and left and up and right. Number 3, get my lines. Let's do domain first. I'm going to travel from left to right and determine where the graph starts and stops. Do I have graph all the way out here to the left or arrow pointing out here? No. So this one is not going to be negative infinity. At what x value does the graph start? Well, it starts right there. It's between 2 and 3, so I'm going to call that 2.5. I have graph, 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 graph. At what x value does the graph stop? Looks like between 9 and 10. Let's call that 9.5. Since I have values at 2.5 and 9.5, they get brackets. For the most part, if it's a number, it's going to get a bracket. If it's an infinity, it's going to get a parenthesis. That's not necessarily the case always. Unless there's an asymptote or an open circle, it generally will be the case. All right, so now let's go with my range. Range is all possible y values. So I'm going to hold my pen horizontally and travel from bottom to top. Do I have graph down here or arrow pointing down here? No, so it's not going to be negative infinity. At what y value does the graph start? It starts right here. That y value is 0. I have graph, 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 graph. At what y value does the graph stop? It stops here. That y value is 100. Again, domain, hold your pen vertically. I literally want you to take your pen, hold it up to the screen, hold it vertically, and travel from left to right. That's for domain. For range, I want you to take your pen, I want you to hold it horizontally, I want you to travel from bottom to top. Why don't you try number 4 on your own? If you're still working, please pause. And let's go over it. Domain is all possible x values. I'm going to hold my pen vertically and travel from left to right. My x values start at 0. They end at 12. 0 and 12 are included. My range, I go from bottom to top. I hold my pen horizontally. I don't have graph down here. At what y value does it start? It hits the graph for the first time right there. That's a y value of 1,000. I have graph, graph, graph. At what y value does it stop? Right there at 1,500. And again, those values are included. All right, number 5 is a little tricky. Why don't you try it on your own? All right, please pause. Okay, for domain, I'm holding my pen vertically. I'm going from left to right. I don't have graph, I don't have graph, I don't have graph. Boom, it starts right there. That x value, again, you're looking at the x value. That x value is -4. I have graph, 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 graph. There's an arrow pointing, so it's going on forever. So that's to positive infinity. Infinity always gets a parenthesis. The -4, we get a bracket. That's your domain. Now for range, I'm going to hold it horizontally. Do I have graphs down here or arrow pointing down? No. No graph, nothing, 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 nothing until I get here. I'm looking at the y values. Well, that's a y value of 2. I have, whoops, it's hard for me to grab this line. There we go. I have graph, 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 graph. Now that arrow is pointing, it's mostly right, but it's slightly going up. Because the arrow is slightly going up, it's going up forever. It's going to infinity. Infinity always gets a parenthesis. 2 gets a bracket because it's included. And that's it. And that's it. It's going to take you to do some practice from here, but they're all pretty much the same. You're just finding your domain and your range for each. And that's it. Your classwork/homework is to finish this worksheet. And again, I can determine the domain and range of a function by finding where the graph starts and stops, from left to right for domain, and from bottom to top for range.